Hello and welcome to Deep Impact, a proud member of the Duff Network where we dive deep into Wildbow's most nocturnal work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Sine Die 14.2, which begins with, last chapter Blake and Alister decided to team up, and now they're kind of figuring out exactly what that means. And the first thing that it means is they can start delaying the dawn.
Yeah, and I love the imagery that's set up. Like, I don't know, it was just so cool with all the blue flames lighting this, recently flooded and half-burnt room with all the furniture stacked on the side.
Yeah.
There's just something really cool about everyone gathering around for Alister to do a cool ritual that involves blue fire going everywhere. There's also the bit where, obviously, Green Eyes' eyes get mentioned, and it's like, oh, these don't belong, and I was sort of like, oh, that's not very good imagery. And then, the next thing that happens with Green Eyes is she gets right up in Tiff's grill with no warning. And it's the funniest thing, I think, in the book so far. I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, you've mentioned it like 6 times since you read the chapter, so I can tell you really enjoyed it. It is a funny moment for sure.
I was saying, nothing comes of it. It like Blake doesn't really think on it at all. He's just like, might have to keep an eye on her. That's a bit odd. There's no thought about why this might be happening, what he could do to prevent such like crazy behavior. Because, talking about Green Eyes not looking like she fits in, and then she goes and just become she's the most confrontational in a room that's got Rose and a bunch of Bogeymen in it. So, like, what are you doing, Green Eyes?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a good moment though. And I like that Blake is, I was going to say oblivious, but I guess just a dingus enough that he completely doesn't notice or doesn't connect to the thought of why that's happening, which is...
He doesn't even try. He doesn't even have the thought of, what that's about. He just doesn't take the time to consider it.
Classic Blake. Alister continues to show off how good he is at all this stuff. Even Blake can't help but compliment him.
I mean, yeah, how could you not? This whole thing is super cool, like super legit.
Yeah. There's this bit where Alister, he spins the ring around a little bit, and Rose is like, oh, you don't need to do that. And Alister and Blake both say theatrics at the same moment, which is a classic moment. And Alister smiles and is like, oh, that was funny. And Blake, the line in fact is, Alister smiled, I didn't. Which is so... Alister is so clearly trying to get in the good books of his new brother-in-law, and Blake is just not going for it.
I loved this moment so much. I mean, Alister and Blake, we talked about it after Alister's interlude. They're so perfect for each other, both as antagonists and kind of slightly begrudging allies.
Yeah.
I almost feel like Rose is the third wheel in this trio sometimes. Anyway, this is one of my favorite tropes that TV shows do a lot, where you have a recurring baddie who plays off, the heroes really well as a baddie, and you force them to have to team up for some reason, and you kind of get to explore a new angle in their antagonistic relationship. And it's such a great trope for a reason, and it's being used to full effect with Alister right here.
Yeah, it's really good. And actually, I want to kind of call this out because this is a theme we see throughout the entire chapter of Alister doing really nice and friendly things, and Blake being very, very wary of him, offensively wary of Alister. There's a bit where Alister says, there's more to some chronomancy than simply altering time. And Blake responds, or less to chronomancy than altering time. And Alister's like, and then looks at the others, clearly being like, I wish you hadn't said that in front of all these other people, Blake. And it's it is such a mean-spirited thing to do, just to be like, we all know your magic shit, right, guys?
It does seem like Blake is having a bit of trouble letting go of his bad feelings towards the Bogeymen, and maybe even Alister specifically. The other interesting angle we could consider here is that Alister is Rose's. Obviously, later on in this chapter, we go into the idea that of how much these two will sort of diametrically oppose things that are connected to the other. And obviously, Alister and the other Bogeymen get labelled as Rose's later. So that, on top of just his general distrust for Alister, could be pushing him to not like Alister if he's associated with Rose.
Yeah, that makes sense. I wonder how conscious that is by Blake.
Oh, not at all.
Yeah, it does make sense. You're right. I think that's a fair assumption. Just anything that's got Rose's hands on it, it's kind of like Blake immediately won't get on board with it.
Yeah, and the Boheym name would not be helping.
Yeah.
I also wanted to pull out one other quote, which was Alister just sort of says to Rose, kind of in the middle of everything, we expect you to hold on to your end of the deal. It's not just for our sake, it's common sense. Rose glances over at Tiff, Alexis, and Ty, and she says, yeah, we'll arrange it before we move on to the next steps. And this is just after they've been talking about, Barbatorum being up in the attic. So, just, I guess on the list of things to add to Alistair's achievements in this chapter, I think we can maybe add getting Rose to tell someone else how to keep Barbatorum locked up, which is, I mean, like, bravo. This is long overdue. I think this chapter is kind of defined to me as the chapter where Alister is a very good leader.
Yeah.
We're about to see he even helps Evan.
Yeah.
And who doesn't love Evan? Like, as a reader, I think that bit is especially included in this chapter because it pretty much instantly wins over most of the readers, I think. Like, when you see Alister heal Evan as a reader, you're like, yep,
well,
Alister, check.
Yeah. No, you're right. But the fact that he's able to get Blake and Rose working together again, in my mind, is like the pinnacle of achievements.
Yeah.
So Alistair asks to speak to Blake outside, and Rose also comes along, I guess.
Same thing. Rose, Blake, what's the difference?
And Alistair reveals... Yeah. Alistair reveals that he knows about the secret puppet master thing, but it seems that nobody really knows who it is, which we kind of thought it might be the Abyss last chapter, but it seems there's something more going on here. I don't know. I wonder if Podrick knows. Like last chapter, in 13.x, I got I guess I made the assumption that Podrick knew who was behind it because he seemed to have that vibe, but I don't know, maybe not.
Yeah, I had that impression as well, and it wasn't until I read what you'd written just there that it made me think, Podrick is 100% the sort of person who would write it in such a way to give you the impression he knew when he has absolutely no clue.
Yeah.
So I'd now put it at like an even 50-50 as to whether he does actually know what's going on. Yeah, I mean, I guess, obviously there's some more in this direction later on in the chapter, so we'll talk about it a bit more later.
Yeah, and Alistair also helps kind of close a few dangling threads. Things like why Molly is so powerful or why the Bogeymen seem so powerful at the moment, which we kind of had already put together as related to this, but it's nice for Alistair to confirm that these things are all kind of playing into this secret Puppet Master Abyss agenda.
Yeah, it just kind of is a bit of cleaning up of, like, we don't really get any new information here, any significant new information. It's just kind of like Walbo maybe closing off threads that he saw people chasing down that were not the direction you're meant to be having your head spun in.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the one thing that sort of came out to me from this was, in 13.x, I got the impression it wasn't a practitioner. I can't even remember exactly why, but obviously here the assumption seems to be it's probably a practitioner. I mean, we're heading off to fight Briar Girl and Mara next, which, given if we're looking for someone who's helping tank Jacob's Bell using the Abyss, I mean, Mara does seem like a good bet.
Yeah, it seems like she's the kind of person who would do it just to fuck with everybody. Be like, well, civilization shouldn't be here at all, so
yeah,
see
exactly.
Ya.
Yeah, she'd be completely on board with this, absolutely.
As you mentioned, Alistair also uses some power to heal Evan, and Blake, seems actually even reluctant to let him do this, which is a bit of an interesting take.
Yeah, well, I love how this bit kind of foreshadows all the stuff about relationships that we'll get into soon, where Rose gives permission to sort of touch Evan, and Evan's like, no, doesn't count. And then, yeah, Blake's response to all this is, it happens, and Evan's very happy, and Blake's just like, yeah, sure, thanks, but, I'm thinking tactically, and I know that you've just done this so you can manipulate me in the future. And I don't think he's completely wrong, to be honest. I think Alistair's clever enough that had crossed his mind too, but I also think that if someone wants to just keep doing nice things to you, is that the worst thing? I don't know. I guess that's what Podrick did to Mags or Maggie back then. So
Yeah.
maybe not. But it does kind of feel like Blake is just looking for excuses to hate Alister.
Yeah, and I think Alistair's, is it a manipulation for him to be nice to get Blake on side? I don't know. I don't know if I am comfortable calling that a manipulation.
Yeah. You're just trying to get me to like you by doing nice things for me, you asshole. Yeah. I'm on to you.
So Machiavellian.
I mean, I guess that's the thing. I walked away from this chapter and even the previous few kind of so on board with Alister and everything that he's been about. Yeah. Like, as I said, this chapter is so... I feel like it's designed to manipulate the readers into being on Alister's side, and that does make me a little bit suspicious. I no longer trust this book on stuff like this, so I'm sort of trying to keep myself a step back and wait for another shoe to drop. But at the same time, I do think maybe Blake is being a bit ridiculous here.
Yeah, I don't know. Alistair's strategy is basically be completely open and transparent with Blake, and eventually you'll have to come around, right? And it does seem to be more or less working on Blake.
Yeah, absolutely. It's working on me too.
Yeah. So, since Rose decided to come along for this conversation, Blake and Rose inevitably end up just getting back into the old dynamic of sniping at each other. And Alistair plays the conversation cop a bit, clearly getting fed up at their interactions. Like, it's a very exasperated husband vibe, which I really like.
Yeah, him playing the peacekeeper here is very fun. I struggled not to just pull out every bit where Blake and Rose interact and then Alistair chimes in. Like, there's sort of this escalation in how he tries to, like, get them to stop confronting. Like, at the start, he's sort of like, well, I think what Rose is trying to say is... And then by the end, he's just like, can you two just not talk? Like, fuck.
The specific line is, let's not have you two talk to each other, okay? Make it a rule. Which is so passive-aggressive, but also correct. Like, that's clearly the best rule.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Yeah, I mean, again, it's another thing that makes me want Alister as the Lord of Jacob's Bell. I think what I really like about this whole segment is we really ramp up how much Blake and Rose are essentially unable to agree on anything. And it's just like they can't agree on any single thing. And then suddenly it's like, oh, should we call the lawyers in? And they're both just immediately together like, nah. And it's it makes you instantly go, okay, so we know that that's objectively a fucking terrible idea.
Yeah.
If it finally united these two. And then as if that payoff isn't sort of enough, we then pay it off again almost immediately because when Alister suggests they're going to have to coordinate, they're both like, oh, shit. And, they agree in how terrible that is. So I like how there's sort of two payoffs for the price of one here. We get this ramp up to explain how terrible an idea calling the lawyers is. And then we also use that to say, and also the idea of coordinating to these two is just as horrible that they're also on the same page here.
Yeah. It's a good way of setting it up, and it immediately conveys to Alistair. It's used for the lawyers, but then there's one other one where they agree on it, and it's kind of like, it's a nice little recurring way for us to emphasize how terrible some things are.
Well, the other thing they agree on is how horrible it's going to be trying to coordinate with each other.
Yeah,
which is just like, and I think putting that to them on par with calling the lawyers really sets up for how much fun this is going to be watching them try to coordinate.
Yeah, and eventually Alistair kind of says to them, "Hey, look, like, you guys need to get on the same page." And he actually mentions it as, like, it's time to balance the scales, right? Which initially made me think that he was going to try and convince Rose to do, like, a blood transfusion thing or something like that, but...
Yeah, me too.
But Alistair's plan, I think, is a lot more practical and good. And it is like he has a direct line into the audience's brain of like, yes, finally someone is going to get them to actually practically work together, thank God.
I mean, this does seem to be the best strategy we've seen that doesn't involve Rose being in the mirrors and powerless to stop Blake doing shit, which so far has been the most effective strategy the two have employed. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what I really like about Alister in this chapter is it's not that he's just trying to do things that, like, I'm all about. It's that he's actually doing them. Like, he actually heals Evan he kind of gets these two to agree to work together and balance their connections, which is like, this is the real fucking magic. As you said, forget this little time delay trick nonsense that he's done. He's getting these two on the same page. That's far more impressive.
Yeah, the Sine Die ritual was just a cover-up to explain why he's lost all his power, because he's actually spent it getting Rose and Blake to agree.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, like, as well, this whole idea of splitting up the group, like, I just love this from a sort of metatextual perspective, because, like I was just saying last episode, how I had this, like, big long laundry list of conversations I wanted Blake to have with people, and this is such a fun way to kind of split those up into, like, groups that, we're kind of mixing up dynamics, as well as knowing in the back of our heads now that Rose is probably going to be trying to do convincing of them to come to her side in the background. This is very fun. I can't wait to see more of this.
Yeah, it's a good setup for the arc for sure. So Blake and Rose are split into groups, and they all get their little group of followers with which to perform various missions around town.
Yeah, so basically Rose and her troop are going after Briar Girl, and Blake and his troop are going after Mara. And yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of keen to see where this goes, because Mara and Briar Girl are kind of the obvious answers, which makes me think it's not them. So I'm very excited to try and get them knocked out of the way as suspects, so we can find out, the real puppeteer was, I don't know, it's Alister all along.
Yeah. I want to touch on here, Blake has clearly got the better team.
Yeah.
So Peter and Roxanne are on Blake's team, whereas Ellie and Kathryn are on Rose's team. I can't imagine having Ellie and Kathryn on your team. Like, they're the most useless. And then Blake has Tiff while Rose has Alexis, which I think is relatively even, those two.
Yeah, I think Alexis. Actually, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. That's probably pretty even.
Yeah, Alexis seems like
Ellie's
more of a generalist, while Tiff is like quite defensive, I guess.
Yeah, which of course plays naturally into Blake's style. She can try and keep him alive, I guess. I mean, somebody has to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, you're right. Like, Ellie has some skills. We saw how useful her thieving skills were against Eva.
Yeah.
So she's not the worst, but definitely, like, I would pick Peter. And Roxanne seems to have a lot of potential. It didn't really work out in the Abyss or anything, but like, just based on how Roxanne was set up, I'm not willing to write her off yet.
Yeah, I don't know. Roxanne is like 2 steps away from being Ava, I reckon. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I also find it hilarious that Blake's new Boogie Bunch got split up.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder how some of them feel about that. He hasn't even spoken to some of them directly yet. Like, I love this idea that he just met some of these guys 10 minutes ago, and they're already getting divvied up like he owns them.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it?
I mean, it's really a testament. It's really a testament to how much better Blake is at relationships than Rose, I reckon.
Yeah. I don't know. If I was like, okay, let's form an alliance with this guy, and then it was just like, okay, you're now my tools, so go off with this other person. I don't know.
Yeah, well, because they joined up with him. They're like, yeah, let's go take out Alister. We know when we're being manipulated. And Blake was like, yep, right, okay, let's go get that manipulator. And then 5 minutes into being there with him, he's like, okay, let's do what Alister says. He's just manipulated me into being on his side.
Now you guys go follow Alistair's wife around, right? And do what she says. The other reaction that I do like that we get to see is Jeremy comes back and he's like, wait, wasn't the plan going to be killing the Bogeymen? You wanted to kill the Duchamps, but now it's the Bogeymen, you're okay with it? Like, he's a little bit PO'd at that, I reckon.
Yeah, fairly, I'd say. Because, like, that was a fairly solid plan. Do to the Bogeymen what you just did to the Duchamps, so that you can get everyone united behind you to fight Johannes. It was a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
And I mean, Blake's argument here is basically, that's still kind of happening. And it is. It's just now Alistair's the one calling the shots, so It's not really happening.
Yeah, exactly. It's a slight difference, but enough to make I think, a fair change to the overall feeling of it.
Yeah, well, it serves as a great reminder to us, this confrontation with Jeremy, as to how well Alister has done at sidestepping, his lateral step around Blake. He's now basically kept Blake on the same path and satiated Blake's need for the Bogeymen to be powerless, but somehow managed to put himself in charge of Blake at the same time.
Yeah.
It's like, well done, Alice. I mean, as I said, this chapter is just the Alister is a very good leader chapter.
Yep. So yeah, Rose and her crew are going after the Bright Girl. Blake's crew is going after the Hag, which feels mean. Like, I don't know if we've ever called Mara the Hag before. It seems like a bit of a spiteful nickname.
I think she has been referred to that sometimes, but like, you're right, it comes across as way meaner than like the Crone. Like Crone Mara, because Crone Mara felt like a title.
Yeah.
Whereas just the Hag seems so dismissive and rude. I'm kind of like, wow, Blake, like, you know, I know she's trying to kill all these, you know, innocent people, depending on your perspective. But yeah.
Yeah, it's cold.
I mean, as if Mara cares, let's be honest. Mara probably doesn't give two
she
shits what they call her.
So Jeremy, seemingly out of spite at Blake's changing of the plan, gives Blake's team a very cryptic warning about how powerful Johannes is. And before long, this kind of comes to fruition as they see basically a few ginormous, like, Attack on Titan style others that are coming out to play.
I mean, I love having Peter here to do the whole, like, normal person calling out the bullshit of this world when Jeremy's just like, oh, wait till you see this. It's pretty crazy. Anyway, bye. And Peter's like, are you fucking serious? Are you going to pull that shit right now?
And Jeremy basically just winks at them and then walks away.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what's interesting as well is Blake has a thought as Jeremy's walking off where he's sort of like, you know, this is what happens when you take the good Sandra away from Jeremy's. He's just the arsehole he was before. Which I thought was an interesting thought because I think it's harsh, but I also think it's probably not entirely wrong. And it got me thinking, you know, I think we've compared Jeremy and Blake at various points. I was trying to think, could this be saying something about Blake and his connections? Like, you know, is Green Eyes or even Rose meant to be his balancing partner?
I mean, Evan probably.
Yeah, you're right. Evan's a good one too.
I don't know. The idea that, like, obviously Sandra probably had some good influence on Jeremy, but if I was going to think of a reason why he's a bit less or a bit more of an asshole than usual, I would think he did just kind of turn on his wife and get some of their family murdered. Like, it's probably not the best night for him. That was what, like half an hour ago?
Yeah, and also Blake just came and completely changed the plan to not be anti the other rival family. Yeah. So you're right, but I do think Isadora probably hit the nail on the head, like hooking Sandra and Jeremy up. Like I do think Jeremy probably would have been a different person if he hadn't kind of ended up falling in love with Sandra.
Yeah, I think so too.
So I do think there's something behind what Blake's saying here.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, Johannes is being set up as the villain of this arc, and I'm excited for him to finally be center stage. He's been in the wings for so long. Like, it's finally time to see, okay, what can you really do, Johannes? How powerful actually are you and all your other friends?
Yeah, and because you're right, he's been set up as the big one yet to drop for so long, and it seems like we're getting a dragon and a giant. I mean, as has already been discussed on our Discord, it took me until the second try to actually understand what was happening here, thanks to some pointers from our patrons. But yeah, I mean, I like this idea because Johannes' domain has been set up as, you know, the good old days for the others type thing, and now we're getting two bread and butter classics of Western fantasy literature. Your dragon and your giant. Like, I think they fit that bill kind of very well, and I can't wait to see how they play in Pact.
Yeah, I actually had this thought as well of, like, it's that classic kind of medieval or D&D style of monsters, right? Yeah. And I am, you know, Pact is obviously a kind of modern American supernatural tale, and I am very excited to see the take that, you know, medieval mythology has in this world. It's awesome.
Yeah, me too.
So we'll see what happens next chapter, I suppose, because that's the end of Sine Die 14.2. But before we end our corresponding episode, it's time to pull out some comments from when this chapter first came out 5 years ago and see what other people are saying about this chapter.
Yeah, so why don't you kick things off, Ruben?
Sure. So I put out a comment by Sir Fuente, and this comment was pretty good, but I'm going to be honest, I put it out mainly because there's one line that kind of got me thinking, where they say, the arch-nemesis team up to face the big bad, meaning Blake and Rose. After that matter is settled, the two must have their ultimate final battle. Who will strike first, Blake or Rose? And this kind of made me think about, obviously Blake and Rose are, by design, in constant conflict, but I'm kind of...
Yeah.
I want to pick your brain a bit and see what you think about the idea that this story is going to end with them having a final showdown. Like, is that where you think we're going?
I mean, I think it's quite likely, actually, because I think the story has gone out of its way to kind of establish that there isn't really a way around that. Like, I think we've even had bits about how, even if one of them just tries to leave, the universe will kind of conspire to put them back in the same area and have them in conflict. So, yeah, like, I do think there is a pretty good chance that at some point these two are going to have to resolve things pretty finally somehow.
Okay. Who do you think's going to win in the fight?
I actually think Blake might. I actually think Blake could just win in the first strike. Like, I don't know. I think from a metatextual perspective, I think it's more interesting because I think if Rose killed Blake, she'd just kind of be like, oh, good, that's done with, based on how she acts most of the time.
Sure.
Whereas Blake would feel guilty about it, or a lot more guilty, and so that means he'd suffer more after winning, which means it's more likely to happen in this world. But yeah, I don't know. I think like we usually think of Blake as the kind of nicer one and Rose as the more ruthless one, but I think maybe Blake is underestimating how quickly he can just decide to kill some people.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that last chapter, arc, right?
Exactly. So I'd actually put my money on Blake, not just because he's the protagonist, but that definitely helps.
Yeah. Okay, cool. What comment did you pull out?
So I pulled out an interesting comment by Osato, who just sort of raised the question, hey, why don't some of these people just book it and leave? And I mean, I just thought that was an interesting question. It got me thinking, sort of going through each person and trying to figure out, at this point when the Abyss is just trying to swallow up the whole town, what is stopping some of these people from just saying, hey, fuck Jacob's Bell, I'm out? Yeah, so I guess I was just interested. We just thought we could have a quick discussion about, for the Duchamps at this point, what is stopping them from just being like, hey, fuck this place, let's get out? Like, hey, Toronto sounds real great right now. Ottawa, great place, let's go.
Yeah, for the Duchamps, I think that's probably on the table. I think the Bogeymen are probably a bit too tied to it right now, which kind of ties Rose to it. Plus, I don't think they want to just, after all this, hand the remains of Jacob's Bell over to Johannes. Like, I feel like there's just a bit of spite in there, meaning that they want to keep fighting.
I mean, maybe. Like, I definitely think for the Bogeymen, this is where their power is established. The Bogeymen have been here for a long time, so of course they need to stay here.
Yeah.
I can totally buy that. The Duchamps, I'm a little bit more. Yeah, I get that you're spiteful, but when does your survival instinct kick in and just get the fuck out of there? Like the Thorburn family is another one. Maybe not Rose and Blake, but I am a little surprised that people like Peter and Roxanne aren't just booking it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Whereas, I think Blake has taken this stand on principle, and I think he has to kind of see it through. I think Rose is too stubborn to give up the house. So, I get what some people are saying, but there are a lot of others where I'm just like, has the sunk cost fallacy maybe got to you a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, maybe it is just that, since the siege at the house, I don't think there's been an opportunity to leave.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you could just start running.
Yeah, I don't know. Would that work? Maybe it would work. I feel like there would be stuff that would mean it doesn't work because it's dangerous enough out there.
Actually, yeah, you're right. There's so many crazy others running around. Maybe you don't just want to run out somewhere.
Yeah. And have nobody looking for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Some good comments from people 5 years ago, but of course, to see what's really going to happen, we'll have to see the next chapter. And that's the end of our episode. If you liked this show, why not leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or Spotify or whatever, man. Just you do your thing.
Just write a blog post where you give us 5 out of 5. I mean, that counts.
Just tweet a 5 at us and we'll know what you mean.
Speaking of tweeting, we're on Twitter at MediaMD Podcast. Something we haven't been mentioning enough is that our live read schedule is all over the place at the moment because we're recording in preparation for the holidays.
What day is it?
Wait, this episode comes out on Wednesday?
Oh.
So I actually think the next live read, there's doofmedia.com/calendar. That's where you can find all the info because I'm getting very confused already. But yeah, the live reads are going to be a bit ahead of the episodes for the next month and a bit. So, keep an eye on our Twitter to see where we're actually up to.
Yes. We have a discussion question that is currently active that you can leave your answers to. That question is, what other places might have sunk into the abyss? Already someone has said Atlantis, so you can't say that one. So think of some other cool ideas, some other interesting real or fictional places that may have sunk into the abyss over time. And
we're just going to get 10 answers that are just Atlantis now.
10 Atlantises. Or Atlanta, but the one from Futurama that falls into the ocean and they become mermaids. So if you have an answer to that question, leave your answer in our discussion thread, which you can find linked down below, or just comment on this chapter in general. What you thought of, I don't know, the big dragon, I guess?
And why you can't wait for it to do stuff next chapter. I mean, I assume it breathes fire. Well, actually, I think we saw it breathe fire.
Yeah.
But who knows what else it can do. So, we already mentioned the Doof Media calendar page. There's other pages on the Doof Media website. It's more than one page on the website. Mm-hmm. It's pretty crazy.
It's a whole website with multiple pages.
There's even a page for We've Got Ward, which is coming out just around the same time as this episode.
Mm-hmm.
So go check that out. Ward is pretty great at the moment. And I'm excited to hear Matt and Scott's thoughts on some of the latest chapters. Yeah,
if you read Ward but you don't listen to We've Got Ward, I would thoroughly recommend it because there's a lot of stuff going on in Ward that's confusing and you're like, what are the actual implications of this? So it's useful to have somebody explain that to you.
Yeah, 100%.
If you like the shows on the Doof Media Network, you can support us by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/doofmedia. Your contributions would be much appreciated, and you also get some perks if you donate at different levels, so check that out on the Patreon.
Yep, and speaking of Ward, speaking of Pact even, we talked about it a bit today.
Never heard of it.
Patreon.com/Walbo. That's where Walbo's money comes in and the stories come out.
Yeah,
it's a machine where you put money in and you get great stories out the other end. So please spare any money you can for Walbo, and we'll keep getting stories.
Yeah, or just share Worm or Pact with somebody. Just do that, and then they'll get stuck into it, and then they might donate to his Patreon. So that's another thing you could do. And another thing you could do is wait for our next episode, which is coming out soon on Friday the 6th of December. That's Sine Die 14.3. And we'll see you then.
See ya.